good morning, everyone. Today I'm joined by Professor Kristin Henning, our Agnes N. Williams Research Professor and Professor of Law at our Law Center. She also directs our Juvenile Justice Clinic. So Professor Henning, thank you for taking the time to be with us for this conversation. Let's get started. Since 1995, you've served as a member of our faculty at our Law Center, and in 2015 took on leadership of our Juvenile Justice Clinic. In the same year, the clinic's faculty expanded that clinic into our Juvenile Justice Initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about the Juvenile Justice Initiative and what makes it so important?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, President DeGioia. It's great to be here. I love what you're doing. So indeed, I have been at Georgetown since 1995, and I actually came to Georgetown as a Prettyman Fellow in the juvenile and criminal justice clinics at the law school. So I was here from 95 to 97, and then I left and went to the DC Public Defender Service for about 3.5, almost 4 years. And really began to specialize in juvenile justice work. And when there was an opportunity to come back, I readily came back to Georgetown. I loved my time here in the clinical programs. I found it as a wonderful way to get involved. And I should say that our Juvenile Justice Clinic has been at Georgetown a real staple of our clinical programs for more than 40 years. And we represent children accused of crimes in the District of Columbia, and we take our third-year law students into DC Superior Court. And I have to say that it is really almost impossible to do this kind of work in the District of Columbia or in any city, really, for that matter, without really becoming acutely aware of the need for systemic reform. And so that's where our initiative came from. It gave us an opportunity to say, we're not only going to continue to represent children, but that we want to do some policy, some training, and some reform work in the city. And we have a number of sort of guiding principles or themes that really shape our initiative work, but I can just share maybe 2 of them with you. One of them is racial justice, right? So I, personally have been representing children in the District of Columbia for 25 years, and most of the clients that I represent in the clinic and when I was at the Public Defender Service are Black and brown children in a city that is really no longer predominantly Black and brown. And so there are real obvious racial disparities in the system. And so that was has become one of our primary focal points for our initiative projects. So we think of the initiative as really refining the individual representation, the direct representation of children in the courts in a way that names explicitly those racial injustices, those racial disparities. And so as a result, I mean, we might represent a child and ask the court to think of our child as a reasonable Black child, thereby sort of suspending traditional notions of reasonableness in the law, and instead applying this reasonable Black child frame that accounts for the realities of policing and racism and trauma, racial traumas in America. So that's one lens. Another aspect of our initiative work in the racial justice theme is training. So we recognize that what we were doing with our students, the work we were doing with our students, is replicable, right? And so we began to develop resources. So sample pleadings that other jurisdictions might use, or trainings on implicit racial bias in the criminal and juvenile legal system, or other just tools like annotated bibliographies, for example, on implicit racial bias, or annotated bibliographies on police trauma, and then really thinking about how we can help other defenders and other stakeholders in the criminal legal system use those to think about critical legal questions. So that was really important to us. And then, of course, research and writing. Georgetown is known for the scholarship that we produce. And so really thinking about what kind of infographics that we might produce that will be useful to the court locally to capture some of the racial disparities, but also more traditional academic scholarship. So writing about racial justice reform within the criminal legal system became really, really important to us. And then I'll just say a little bit, just a piece about another major frame.
Sure.
And that's the adolescent development work that we really know so much more now about adolescent development than we ever did before. And so our initiative takes that seriously. So we spend a lot of time, again, in training, developing training materials, developing resources to really help us think about how does adolescent development and what we know about the adolescent brain, how does that affect the criminal legal system? Impulsivity, peer influence, limited life experience with the police. How does all of that affect critical legal questions like mens rea or intent, culpability, search and seizure, interrogation, and the like? So that's really what our initiative is about.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Now, you've been a leader for both local and national juvenile justice reform. Can you share more about the types of reforms or changes you believe are most important in this moment?
Yeah. So I would start by saying we have to be quite frank, radically reduce the footprint of police officers, of policing in the lives of children. And in particularly in the lives of children of color. And so by that, I mean, I think we need to stop trying to police our way out of social problems, right? Social problems like poverty, mental illness, normal adolescent development. We can't police our way, out of adolescence, right? We can't police our way out of racial tensions that naturally exist. We can't police our way into better and safer school systems. So I think that's really important. That's probably my overarching theme, is reducing the footprint of police officers in the lives of children. And I think we do that by reallocating some of the funding, some of the traditional funding that we set aside for police officers, to more effective strategies to achieve the goals that we want. So if we want safer schools, better education, then we need to reallocate the funding for school resource officers into mental health supports, right? Psychologists, counselors, behavioral interventionists, things of that nature. And I think maybe another final area of reform in this moment, right, is maybe limiting the scope of authority of police officers, where police officers will remain, but ensuring that there are regulations that govern use of force for children, that require adolescent appropriate policing, that require good peer intervention by police officers and the like.
Sure. Thank you. Now, you've done extensive work training juvenile defense attorneys, including your work to develop a national training curriculum. What makes the role of the juvenile defense attorney unique? What sort of preparation is necessary for those engaging in this work?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I would go so far as to say that no other right that we guarantee to an accused person in the criminal legal system in America has any real meaning without the benefit of defense counsel. And so when we think about confrontation rights, when we think about fair and meaningful testing of the government's evidence, when we think about proof beyond a reasonable doubt, when we think about presumptions of innocence, all of those are made possible in partnership with the accused person and his or her defense counsel. And I think what happens is that we forget that with children. and that when children come into the system, that one of two things happen. Most often it is that we want to be maternalistic or paternalistic towards kids, and we forget that they still have due process rights, right? And they still need the wise counsel of children. And so I think sort of the paternalism and due process together gets complicated and gets lost. And so what we do and what we think is unique about training juvenile defense attorneys is making sure that we honor the uniqueness of adolescence and how adolescence affects every single critical legal question in the case, as we just talked about, but at the same time, honoring what it means to be accused and to have those due process rights. And so there are wonderful training programs across the country for criminal defense lawyers, adult criminal defense lawyers, the National Criminal Defense College, Gideon's Promise, all of them are wonderful, but none of them really focus specifically on juvenile justice. And so we've done a couple of things. We launched in partnership with the National Juvenile Defender Center, we have a curriculum. We run a summer academy called the Juvenile Training Immersion Program. And juvenile defense attorneys apply to the program from all across the country, and they come to Georgetown. They actually live in the dorms. They go back to college and they live in the dorms for 7 days. And we do this really intensive boot camp for juvenile defense attorneys, really translating all of the training that a criminal defense attorney gets into that adolescence frame. So that's one of our major projects. We also then realized how much demand there was for this work, and so we launched a Train the Trainers program. So we actually go out across the country and we train experienced criminal defense attorneys, or juvenile defense attorneys as it were, to give this training. And then finally, we launched most recently a program we're really proud of called the Ambassadors for Racial Justice here at the Law Center, again in partnership with the National Juvenile Defender Center. And that is, again, people apply, juvenile defenders apply, and they have to demonstrate a strong commitment to racial justice reform. And we equip them with the tools that they need to really advocate for racial justice.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, since the murder of George Floyd in May, our nation's been engaged in urgent conversations on the nature of policing, public safety, our criminal justice system. You have been engaging with these issues for many years now through both your legal and your academic work. How are you engaging with students around this conversation? What sorts of context or considerations do you find important for deepening our understanding of this moment?
So, I got to say I'm very lucky, and I'm lucky in the sense that I teach a clinical program, which by definition is law in action, right? So it gives our students an opportunity to apply everything they've learned from their traditional classroom courses, the criminal justice courses, criminal law and procedure, evidence, professional responsibility, and they get to bring that together on behalf of live clients. And so it is impossible not to talk about, right? All of these issues, policing, race, George Floyd in particular, all of it from day one. In fact, we open our clinical, our very first class before we even do introductions is a class about race in the criminal and the juvenile legal system, right? And we talk about who the clients are that are most impacted and what they look like. So literally within the first 15 minutes of meeting us, their new faculty, they understand that this is a clinic that is going to be about racial justice. It's going to be a clinic that deals with race and policing. And so throughout the year, we build upon that, and we have plenty of opportunity to talk about it. But I will say we did recognize the importance of this moment in light of the killing of George Floyd. And we have engaged our students in the policy work. So we started our initiative, and I told you about all the reform efforts and the coalition work that we do, but we realized that this was an opportunity to really bring the students into the fold into that work. And so we have designated a number of policy projects that each student will be involved in, everything from providing research and advocacy, policy advocacy for legislative reform for DC City Council to the extent that we are allowed. We've got some proposals that we would like to advance. So
Sure.
we've
Sure.
got some ideas.
And in this period where these last 6 months, you've been also engaged in a writing project. Can you share with us a little bit about your most recent book?
Yes, so I am writing a book indeed about race, adolescence, and policing. It is tentatively called, with publisher's final approval, but Arrested Development, from Emmett Till to Tamir Rice and beyond. And it is indeed about what we know about criminalizing normal adolescent behaviors. It is about policing as trauma in Black and Brown communities. It is about reform efforts. And it really is meant to be for a lay reader, right? And it weaves in the narratives of many of the young people that I and the clinic, have represented over the last 10 years in ways that I hope are really accessible for the audience and moves us to a place where adolescence, race policing and adolescence is at the forefront of the conversation, and really begins to guide and transform the way we think about policing children in America.
Beautiful. And can you just share a little bit about what it's been like providing legal aid to vulnerable populations during the pandemic? How has the virtual learning environment impacted our clinics and the work of our students and your colleagues trying to provide these very urgent legal services?
Extraordinarily important question, and it's been extraordinarily difficult so far. We have had to be ever vigilant to due process, for example. The notion of what does it mean to have access to counsel when you are currently incarcerated in a prison or a detention facility, which is one of the highest risk, COVID environments, right? And so, we as professors sending or thinking about what do we do with our students, right, in those contexts? And so how do we provide and insist upon access to counsel? So I think we've tackled it from a number of different angles. I think some of it has been, can we work collaboratively with other stakeholders, for example, correction staff, to provide video conferencing, and to what extent that, we actually we participated in a drive trying to get folks to donate computers and the like to our local detention facility, so that our clients could indeed have access to counsel. It's just as simple as that, and teaching students that we've got to do that. We have had much more contentious fights and insisting that our children have a right. And so that even if we don't do a drive, even if we don't donate resources, you have to figure out a way for us to engage with our young people. So it's been, it's been the litigation strategy, the threat of habeas. Our students, both in our criminal defense clinic and in our prisoner advocacy clinic, along with the juvenile justice clinic, have all been working on compassionate release cases to get accused adults and youth out of DC jails and DC detention facilities. We've really engaged both our fellows, our LLM students, as well as our JD students into that effort. So it's been challenging, but students have risen to the challenge. And we pose the question. We teach them, the way it's done in person. And then we ask the students, so how will you accommodate for this virtual world? And so we engage them in problem solving.
Oh, thank you. I can't thank you enough for joining us in this conversation this morning. In closing, is there one message you'd like to share with our community as we begin this new semester?
Oh, it's a great. So I think I love saying, especially to the young people who are listening, that we are in a moment of transformation in our country. There's so many critical issues at play, and that wherever you fall on the continuum of politics and ideology, you have a role to play, right? Every person can do one thing to transform and to make our country better. And so I would just say, follow your ideas to their logical conclusion. And so you asked at the very beginning about what we were doing in the initiative, and every one of the projects that we rolled out of the initiative, quite frankly, was an idea, started as an idea. And so just figuring out how to do that, Ambassadors for Racial Justice, you do that with an idea, you pull the right people together to have the conversation, and you make a difference. And every single person in our community can make a difference.
Thank you. Again, thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for all of your contributions to our community. I can't begin to express my appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I look forward to being with all of you again soon. Take care of yourselves and take care of everyone around you, for every Hoya, everywhere.